A preliminary government report is shedding light on the continued use of solitary confinement in Canada's federal prisons. A 2019 law was designed to eliminate solitary confinement, but the report shows reform has been slow. Here are some of the key findings. 16% of all stays in structured intervention units, or SIUs, that's solitary confinement essentially, were 2 months or longer. More than a third of all prisoners transferred to these units had more than one stay in the unit. Only 21% met the legal requirement of spending 4 or more hours out of their cells on at least half the days they were there. The report comes after a struggle for data between its co-author Anthony Dube and the Correctional Service of Canada. For more on the report and that struggle, we've reached Professor Dube in Toronto. Anthony Dube, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to start with the conclusions in your report that structured intervention units, which is what they are called, but which I think most people will call solitary confinement, they're not working as the legislation and the law sort of prescribes that they should be working. What exactly did you find?
Well, what Canada did for various reasons is to set up what's thought to be a new regime. And the new regime says that people shouldn't be put in unless it's absolutely necessary. And if they are put in, they should be put in for the shortest period of time that's possible, and there should be attempts to move people out as quickly as possible. And so that would be the first thing that doesn't seem to be working very well, because although many of these stays are relatively short, there are a non-trivial number of people who are staying for very long periods of time. And internationally, the people have been talking about 15 days as being a kind of cutoff for these kinds of experiences. And we're having people who are staying much longer than that. But the second thing is, and the thing which is trying to move it away from the idea of solitary, is that people are supposed to be getting out of their cells for at least 4 hours a day, 4 hours being the minimum, and 2 hours of those 4 hours are supposed to be what's referred to as meaningful human contact. And what we found was that there were substantial numbers of people who both were not getting out for their 4 hours a day, or if they were not getting their 2 hours of meaningful human contact. So that those things were written, the 4 hours a day and the 2 hours a day were written into the legislation, and it's quite clear to us that these were not being accomplished with a large number of people.
So essentially, solitary confinement, or these segregated intervention units, or structured intervention units as they're called, they're being used too often for too long for too many people, and they're not getting the releases that they're supposed to get on a daily basis to make the stay more humane. I mean,
essentially, yes.
Why is this happening? That's what's happening. Why is this happening if the legislation says it is supposed to follow very clear guidelines?
That's a very good question, and our preliminary report doesn't really allow us to understand that. One of the things that we did find out, though, which should give a hint to anybody who's actually interested in trying to answer your question, is that there was some variation across regions, and within regions, a little bit of what we looked at was whether there was variation across institutions. And there was such variation. And what that means is that a institution like Correctional Service of Canada that was interested in improving things has, in effect, some institutions where things seem to be working better than other places. So that should give them an idea about why it isn't working and what could be done to make it work. You'll have to remember, got these data for the first time on the 30th of September, and Jane Sprott at Ryerson University and I decided that we would try to get something out very quickly, because the report on what was going on in these units should have been done months ago, but wasn't. And when we finally got the data on the 30th of September, we decided to try to get something out that would give an overall picture of the operation of these units quickly, so that everybody who was interested could have the same data that we did or the same findings that we did, and we could have a full discussion about what to do next.
You were appointed to look at this in September of 2019 and waited a year for some of the data you needed to do your work. You didn't get it, you quit, or you allowed the committee to expire without filing the report. We're sort of coaxed back with the promise of getting data. And then once you got it and presented your findings, Correctional Services Canada told you the data that they gave you was wrong? Is that correct?
Yeah, let me go back a little bit on that history. We were appointed in September, and in November we made a formal request to Correctional Service of Canada for data. And what we wanted was data every 2 months, 1 month later. So we asked for the December and January data to be given to us in February, so we could very quickly look at what was going on. And then we asked for data to be given to us every 2 months, so they would have a month to prepare it after the 2-month period was over. So we actually expected to have some preliminary data in March that we could then make public and discuss and try to figure out how to improve things. So when we didn't get those data, and there are various sorts of things. We wrote to various people, and we still didn't get them. Our initial appointments from Public Safety Canada were for 1 year. So in the summer of 2020, this past summer, we'd all been there a year. It was a year since our appointments. So our appointments lapsed. We had nothing to do with their lapsing. They lapsed because that's how long these appointments were. We did various things in the spring to try to get data. We never did. We as a panel put together a report which was released in August saying, here's what happened, here's the history, here's why we accomplished 0 in our year of life as a panel. The panel no longer exists, and we have no knowledge. So we released that in August, and that got a fair amount of publicity because people seemed to think that the panel should have done its job. When they found out why we didn't do our job, I think most people were quite sympathetic with us because we, documented all of the things that we tried to do to do our job. But there we were in August of this year, having no information about these very important units within Correctional Service of Canada.
Right, but then you finally got some data, right? And you finally got some data, gave your findings, and now they say the data isn't accurate?
Yeah, I suspect with pressure from Public Safety or from the Minister's Office in Public Safety, we got data at the end of September, which of course we've been told over and over again didn't exist. They gave us data. They gave us data that appeared to us to be in a very well-presented form in terms of the raw data. And then Jane Sprott and I took those data and analyzed them. We gave them to Correctional Service of Canada on the 16th of October. So essentially in a little bit more than 2 weeks, we gave them a good, solid preliminary report of our findings. And we said we want to make these public quickly, so could you, if you want to make comments to us, get them to us by this past Saturday. And we heard nothing from them other than an acknowledgement that they had received it. And then Saturday night at 6 minutes past 8, they emailed us and said, with no comments about our report, but they said, they have found some errors in the data that they gave us. And so they're not sure about, in effect, the validity of the findings. Now, you think about errors, of course there are going to be errors. It's administrative data. Somebody has to record in various ways, various things. They have to record what time they take somebody out of the cell, what time they put them back. You can easily imagine, even though that's being done electronically, that there might be some delays either in the recording of when they took them out or when they put them back in, that they put them back in and forget to scan the little tab to indicate that. So of course there are going to be errors. There are always errors in administrative data of that kind. But they didn't give any substance. They didn't explain anything. And But the peculiar thing is that then they say, oh, and in addition, the findings may be affected by the existence of COVID. Well, they've just told us that the data are not necessarily a very good description, but then all of a sudden these not very good data have to be explained away because of COVID. It was a little bit of a peculiar explanation to be coming to us on the Saturday night after we've had the data for a few weeks and after we've been asking for the data for about 10 months. So it looked to us as if they're trying to explain away findings that they don't like.
Professor Doob, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was Professor Anthony Doob. We invited Public Safety Minister Bill Blair to join us to respond to those concerns that Professor Doob raised and the findings of the report. He was not available, but we are joined by Joel Lightbound, his parliamentary secretary. Mr. Lightbound, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You've been listening in to Professor Doob and his concerns, in particular the timeline of being appointed in September of 2019, not getting data until the end of September of 2020, and then being told the data he based his findings on may not have been accurate. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first off, I want to thank Dr. Doob for the work that he's done. That's why we had this advisory panel to look at how we're implementing these changes to what used to be called solitary confinement and now structured implementation intervention units. In terms of the length of time that CSC took to provide the data to Dr. Doob, I must state that as soon as we were made aware and as soon as Dr. Doob reached out to our office, to Minister Blair's office, saying that he was having a hard time getting that data from Corrections Services Canada, we pressured CSC to provide that data to Dr. Doob so that he could accomplish the work that we've mandated him to do, which is to look at the progress and the failures and the successes in the implementation of these SIUs. So to us, that data is fundamental. The work that Dr. Doob is fundamental. The work that he's done is fundamental for us as we move forward.
But what does it say to you that Dr. Doob couldn't get it simply by asking for it, and the government had to lean on Correctional Services Canada to hand it over? I mean, that doesn't sound like an organization that's cooperating in what is a fairly significant review of a policy that's been described as torture by the courts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. I think moving forward, CSC must be more forthcoming with the data regarding the implementation of SIUs. And to the extent that that CSC purports that there are errors in the data, I think it should be a signal to improve their data collection so as to get the best data possible moving forward, because this is an important policy. And I think it's the humane thing to do, to have these 4 hours for inmates in SIUs outside of their cells, 2 hours of meaningful human contact. But there's another thing that I want to highlight in the changes that we've brought in C83 that move from solitary confinement to SIUs is we've also put forward an independent external decision maker, which is another layer of oversight on the implementation of SIUs by CSC. So we have the advisory panel that Dr. Doob has led. We have the independent external decision makers. So we've added layers of oversight to make sure that we get this right, because this is important and it's something we've committed to do.
So I know CSC is saying there's a problem with the data that Dr. Doob is basing his conclusions on, but do you accept the broad findings that, in his view, and based on what they've seen, that solitary confinement is still being used too often for far too long, and the basic respites that people are supposed to get of 4 hours of time out of their cell and 2 hours of meaningful human contact are not being met at the level required by law?
Well, I think the preliminary report of Dr. Doob clearly highlights that there is a lot more work to be done. However, I'll just highlight that point once more, is there is another layer of oversight with the independent external decision makers. And we've appointed in these positions lawyers from international, from Lawyers Without Border or from provincial human rights bodies to review the decisions made by Corrections Services Canada in terms of the SIUs. And they've reviewed over 1,000 such decisions. They've given advice on how to proceed moving forward on 25% of those decisions by CSC, and they've disagreed with CSC on 2-3% of these decisions. But that's an oversight that didn't exist just a year ago that we brought forward. So I think clearly there's still a lot more work to be done. There's been some improvements, but we need to do more. I agree.
You know, back in 2018, courts in Ontario, British Columbia, they called this type of extended solitary confinement unconstitutional, said it may amount to torture, and that it suggests that 16%, according to this report, of all the stays in these isolation units, they were for more than 2 months. I mean, which is quite a length of time to be locked away from most human contact. So you say there is still a need for reform here, but you look at the inability of Dr. Dube to get the cooperation he was looking for. I mean, what do you do now to push these reforms through in a meaningful way?
Well, clearly, we're going to keep putting pressure on CSC and asking CSC to improve the results. It's been less than a year since SIUs have been in place in Canada. Clearly, and that's why we mandated the panel by Dr. Dube to review the data and provide us with recommendations. So we're going to be looking quite closely to the recommendations by Dr. Dube and how to best implement it in a timely fashion. That's what we have to do.
Will they be given a timeline? Will they be given a deadline? I mean, even on the release of data, that took over a year. On the implementation of reform, will they be given a firm deadline they have to meet?
Well, that's discussions that we're going to have with the Commissioner and with CSC to make sure that what we've provided in the legislation is respected going forward. Okay.
Joël Lightbound, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks to you.
That was the Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety, Joël Lightbound, joining me from Quebec City.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.